He wasn't reckless. He wasn't naive. He knew the risks better than anyone. And still, every day he stepped into the wild, not for the thrill, not for the cameras, but because something inside him burned for it. And in the end, it wasn't a monster that took him. It wasn't hate or hostility. It was instinct, raw and blind. The same heartbeat of nature he had spent his entire life defending. Because that's the truth. The wild is breathtaking, but it is never truly safe. He wasn't just a man with a camera. He was thunder-wrapped in skin, barefoot in the bush, eyes wide with childlike awe and steel nerves. Steve Irwin, relentless, fearless, magnetic, was born in Essendon, Victoria, Australia in the early 1960s, but long before he could write his name, the wilderness had already written its claim on him. His father, Bob Irwin, was a passionate herpetologist. His mother, Lynn, was a wildlife rehabilitator. By the time Steve was barely out of diapers, he was gripping snakes with tiny fingers. By the time most kids were learning to ride bikes, he was helping his dad wrangle crocodiles, absorbing lessons not just about danger, but about balance, about respect, about wild creatures that most people feared without understanding. As the world stepped into the modern age with cable television and convenience, Steve stepped barefoot into swamps. By the 1990s, his show The Crocodile Hunter exploded onto global screens, not as some polished studio production, but as a sun-scorched thrill ride hosted by a man in khakis who talked to animals like they were old friends. Venomous snakes, territorial crocs, creatures with teeth and toxins, Steve treated them all with the same reverence. His iconic shout, "Crikey!" was never scripted. It burst out of him like a lightning strike of pure enthusiasm. People didn't just watch the show, they felt it. They lived through his adrenaline, and through it all, they learned. He wasn't just entertaining, he was changing hearts. At his side was Terry Irwin, an American-born naturalist who married Steve in 1992. Together, they transformed the Australia Zoo in Queensland into a world-class sanctuary, equal parts family home and conservation stronghold. Their children, Bindi and Robert, were raised with wild eyes and wilder surroundings, playing beside animals most people only see from behind glass or in nightmares. But Steve never flinched. Not from crocs, not from snakes, not even from sharks. He believed that with knowledge, respect, and empathy, even the most feared animal could be approached with care. That belief, that trust, is what drew millions to him, and it's what made the events of one calm September morning so unthinkable. It didn't happen in a crocodile-infested swamp. It wasn't a charging shark or a coiled serpent. It happened in crystal-clear waters, so serene they could have been the backdrop of a travel commercial. September 4th, 2006. Bat Reef, just off the coast of Port Douglas in Queensland. Steve was there to film a new documentary called Ocean's Deadliest, meant to spotlight the ocean's misunderstood dangers. Sea snakes, box jellyfish, saltwater crocodiles. But that morning wasn't meant to be risky at all. The main shoot had paused due to weather. With a window of calm, Steve and his longtime cameraman, Justin Lyons, decided to grab some simple, be-harmless footage of Steve swimming gently over the reef. It was supposed to be filler, something tranquil, something quiet. But it would become the last footage ever taken of Steve Irwin alive. Slipped into the turquoise water mid-morning. No protective cages, no gear beyond their goggles and cameras. They'd done this kind of thing countless times, Steve gliding above reef flats, Justin capturing his fluid movement, the sea cradling him like an old friend. Then Steve spotted it. A short-tailed stingray resting peacefully on the sandy bottom. It was massive, about 8 feet across, its wings gently pulsing with the rhythm of the tide. Steve moved in slowly, respectfully, staying above it, careful not to startle the animal or block its escape route. He had handled stingrays before. They were shy, passive, usually non-aggressive unless threatened. The ray stirred, but didn't bolt. It floated. Steve hovered above it. Justin filmed from a few feet away, watching through the lens as the creature twitched. Then, in a flicker, less than a second, the calm shattered. The stingray lashed upward, tail snapping like a whip. Its barb, jagged and venomous, pierced Steve's chest, Not once, multiple times. A moment of instinct, a mistake of positioning. Maybe the ray saw the shadow above it as a predator. Maybe it was just scared. But in that silent blue water, something went terribly wrong, and the camera caught it all. But the footage, to this day, has never been released. It was tragedy unfolding in real time, more haunting because it all looked so peaceful. That day at Bat Reef, the waters shimmered with unnatural clarity, glass-like, dreamlike. Sunlight danced across the ocean floor in slow, rippling waves, casting shifting shadows as if nature itself was trying to warn them in whispers. Beneath the surface, Steve Irwin and his trusted cameraman, Justin Lyons, moved in practiced silence. It wasn't their first time in the wild. It was their rhythm, their ritual. But on that day, beneath that quiet reef, something ancient and unpredictable stirred in the sand, unseen and waiting. The creature was enormous, a bull ray, nearly 8 feet across, with a diamond-shaped body that blended so seamlessly with the sea bottom, it looked like a moving shadow. It drifted like a ghost just above the coral, unbothered by the 2 men tracking it. Justin's camera rolled steadily. Steve, as always, moved with grace and respect, keeping distance, making no threatening motions. He wanted one final shot, just one more clean pass as the Stingray glided away. He hovered above it, adjusting his position for the perfect frame. Then, everything changed. In less than 2 seconds, the creature turned, lightning fast. Its tail arched violently, unnatural in speed and power. In a defensive frenzy, the Stingray lashed out, its venomous barbs striking over 100 times in under 5 seconds. Most missed. One did not. One jagged strike, razor-sharp and instinctive, tore straight into Steve Irwin's chest with surgical precision. At first, no one understood what had happened. It seemed like a punctured lung, serious, but treatable. They'd handled worse. But Steve knew. He didn't scream, he didn't thrash. He surfaced, locked eyes with Justin, and calmly whispered the words no one ever imagined hearing. "I'm dying." Blood turned the water murky as Justin hauled him onto the inflatable boat. Steve, barely conscious, still pulled the Stingray's barb from his chest, a gesture that sealed his fate. The damage wasn't just deep, it was catastrophic. The barb had pierced his pericardium, the protective sac around his heart. Internal bleeding began instantly. The venom wasn't the killer, it was the location. The wound was only a few centimeters wide, but it had done something no crocodile or venomous snake had ever achieved. It had silenced Steve Irwin's heart. The crew began CPR immediately, their hands trembling, voices cracking. For over an hour, they compressed his chest, counted breaths, fought to hold onto a man who had stared down death 1,000 times and walked away smiling. But this time, there was no escape. They were too far from help. No ER, no ambulance, just ocean. The realization crept in, slow and cold. This wasn't a stunt, it wasn't a segment. This was real. And Steve Irwin, the indestructible force of nature, was slipping away. As the boat sped toward Port Douglas, crashing through the waves, the urgency gave way to grief. Steve's pulse had stopped. The silence was deafening. The sky above remained bright. The reef below remained beautiful, but nothing felt alive anymore. At Low Isles, a coral speck off the coast, paramedics waited on shore, but they already knew. At 12:53 p.m. on September 4th, 2006, Steve Irwin was declared dead. The official cause? A penetrating injury to the heart from a Stingray barb. The medical examiner described it simply unsurvivable. His team, men who had filmed his wildest moments, who had waded through jungles, rivers, and danger at his side, stood stunned. Justin Lyons, still trembling, later said, "We thought we were filming a beautiful shot of a stingray swimming, and then out of nowhere it turned into the worst moment of our lives." News of Steve Irwin's death didn't just spread, it detonated across the world. Within hours, headlines blazed through television screens and online feeds. Steve Irwin killed by Stingray, CNN, BBC, ABC, Sky News. Every outlet ran with it, but no one believed it. Not at first. It felt like a cruel prank, A hoax, a headline from some twisted tabloid. Steve Irwin couldn't die, not like this, not from a creature as seemingly gentle as a stingray. But as the hours passed, the truth hardened. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a rumor. It was real. That same evening, thousands of people gathered outside the Australia Zoo in Beerwah, Queensland. They came in silence, in tears, in disbelief. Some brought candles, others laid flowers. Many from children, a few just stood there, watching the flame. A few just stood there, watching the flame of vigil candles flicker in the wind, hoping somehow they'd wake up and the news would be undone. From Los Angeles to London, impromptu memorials took shape in parks, on beaches, in front of embassies. Crayon drawings of crocodiles and snakes lined sidewalks. One child's note simply read, "Thank you for teaching us not to be afraid." But nothing pierced the world's collective heart more than what happened days later at Steve's public memorial service. Broadcast live from Australia's zoo's Crocozooum, the very stadium where Steve had once faced monstrous reptiles with that signature grin. This time, the roar of the crowd was replaced by heavy silence. And into that silence walked 8-year-old Bindi Irwin, clutching a folded paper in her trembling hands. Her voice was soft, steady. No tears, no faltering, just raw courage. "My daddy was my hero," she said. "He was always there for me. He listened. He taught me so many things. I want to help endangered wildlife, just like he did." "My daddy was my hero," she said. "He was always there for me. He listened. He taught me so many things. I want to fight for you badly, soon, and in fierce stuff. If I have corn, I'm coming back. Please help me fight." Fill in. Senseless. How could this happen? That was the question circling the globe. Experts, from marine biologists to venom researchers, were called upon to explain what seemed impossible. Stingrays, after all, aren't known for aggression. They don't stalk. They don't hunt. Their first instinct when threatened is to flee, to vanish into deeper waters or bury themselves in sand. But the ray that struck Steve Irwin was no ordinary stingray. It was a short-tailed stingray, a massive species known for its size, strength, and a tail armed with a venomous barb, sharp as a dagger, serrated like a blade, not a weapon of war, but of survival. And on that day, experts believe the stingray felt cornered. As Steve hovered overhead, perhaps the ray mistook his shadow for danger. In a pure reflex of panic and protection, it struck upward with lightning speed, just once, but with precision, so devastating that it tore through Steve's pericardium, the protective sac around the heart. Stingray strikes usually land on legs or feet. Painful, yes, but rarely fatal. This one had found a 1 in a million path, bypassing ribs, muscle, and all defenses, straight into the heart. Even with an operating room nearby, survival would have been unlikely. Out there, in the middle of the Coral Sea, it was impossible. It wasn't anyone's fault. Not Steve's, not the stingrays. It was a biological accident. A tragic, split-second collision of instincts and anatomy. Steve Irwin, who had swum with rays hundreds of times, who knew their behaviors better than most scientists, had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong moment. One flick of a tail, one perfect angle, and everything changed. Before 2006, Australia had recorded only 2 stingray fatalities in its entire history. Steve Irwin became the third. This was the man who'd faced king cobras, crocodiles, Komodo dragons, and great white sharks. He leaned inches from fangs and venom, laughed in the face of death, and walked away every time. But it wasn't a beast that took him. It was the one animal no one saw coming. Somewhere in the blue silence of Reef, as Steve drifted above the sand, a camera was still rolling. It captured everything, from the peaceful approach to the strike to Steve's final words. Cameraman Justin Lyons, who had filmed beside Steve for years, later confirmed the footage existed. It followed Steve from that fateful moment in the water to the second he collapsed in the boat. And yet, that footage was never shown, never broadcast, never leaked. It vanished from public record. According to Steve's widow, Terry Irwin, the only person legally allowed to decide the fate of that final footage, it was either locked away forever or destroyed entirely. In later interviews, she was resolute. That tape should never be seen, she said. It's not who Steve was. That moment doesn't represent his legacy. It ends it. And just like that, the last seconds of one of the world's most beloved conservationists became one of television history's most whispered about lost tapes. Rumors swirled, of course, speculative chatter, fake clips littering the internet, grotesque recreations masquerading as truth. None were real. All were tasteless. And the authentic footage? Gone. Maybe that's how it was always meant to be. Because what purpose would it serve now? Watching that moment? Would it offer clarity or simply fracture his legacy into a single frame of tragedy? Steve Irwin's life wasn't meant to be defined by how it ended, but by what it stood for. Still, the debate endures. Some believe that, as a public figure who lived on camera, his death should be shared as a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability. But those closest to him, the people who knew him, insist otherwise. His legacy doesn't live in a hidden clip. It lives in every rescued animal, every child who dared to love snakes and spiders, every young conservationist he unknowingly mentored through a TV screen. That legacy is alive. His daughter, Bindi, now a mother herself, continues to speak with the same fierce compassion. His son, Robert, who was just a toddler when Steve passed, now wields a camera with the same purpose. Capturing the wild, not to tame it, but to understand it. And together, the Irwins carry that torch not as a burden, but as a birthright. The Australia Zoo, once a humble reptile park built by Steve's parents, has grown into something much more. A sanctuary, a conservation hub, and a classroom for the next generation of wildlife defenders. Steve's vision beats in every corner of that place. Through their nonprofit, Wildlife Warriors, the Irwin family has expanded his dream far beyond Queensland. They've funded anti-poaching patrols in Africa, staffed wildlife hospitals in Australia, and responded to natural disasters, fires, floods, droughts, with the same urgency and compassion Steve once showed for a single injured koala. Thousands of lives, human and animal, have been saved in his name. Because for Steve, it wasn't about fame or adventure. It was about giving a voice to the voiceless. It was about showing a generation that bravery isn't measured by how close you stand to danger, but by how far you're willing to go to protect what can't protect itself. Thank you for watching. If Steve Irwin's story moved you, if his courage, his laughter, his unshakable love for wildlife still echoes in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. There are more stories like his waiting to be told, more lives worth honoring, and together, we'll make sure his mission never fades.